Good morning, YouTubers. So today's a day everyone's been waiting for: how to repair this rust using pieces and parts from a 1990s Ford truck roof. We're going to go over what to look for when you're, buying a roof out of a junkyard or whatever. And then we're going to go over, how to determine how much of this to cut. What I've decided to do is do a very basic route and then just go up, over, and then down to do this repair. Normally, if I'm bead rolling or I'm using a bead roller, not doing this particular method, I would go up on an angle like this, do more of a triangular approach, and then back down, and then down. So that way, your crucial parts you've got to worry about is you've got this line right here, and then you've got a line down here, and then a line down into the gutter, down in that area. So you don't want these to line up. This is going to be a work truck. It's not really going to be anything fancy. So I don't really care if you can see these two. And this is going to get filled in with seam sealer anyway, so it's not such a big deal. Now the difficult part about this is not only do you have this bend, this is rounded this way slightly. It's got a slight round this way. I don't know if the camera will pick up on it, but there's a slight round this way, and then you have a more major round that way. The other issue you've got, and hopefully the camera will pick up on it, is you've got an S-bend right down in here. And this is a piece that when people try to patch this in, they always mess this up and they can never get this to look right. So you can always tell when this area's been patched by, by this S-bend not being in there. All right, and then also for this rust up here, I'm not going to do a major video on this, but I am going to do a video, complete video on repairing that. But this is a piece off of that cab as well, and as you can see, with no shrinker or stretcher or anything, this matches the contour very well. And I'm going to show you where we cut this off of the cab. There's a little divot right there that you'd probably have to take a hammer and pound out. But nonetheless, this contour is pretty good. So if you've got rust all through here, you can just cut it out of that 1990 cab and repair that. Okay, so as you can see, this is where we cut this piece out of from right here, and it matches right into that front windshield perfectly. Now, if you need more of the curve, of course you've got the seam here, and you'd have to cut that out and weld it up. But you could utilize this entire curve, or down here, you can see I've cut a bunch out of here already, but you can utilize that curve for that front window frame. Now, when you're looking at a roof, a very important thing to look at, and I didn't realize this, is look at how pitted it is in here. I went down through here with wire brush before we got started, and there's some pretty bad pitting going on in here. So I want to try not to use this section of roof. It's not too bad down here, but like I said, if you go to a junkyard or something to pick apart, bring a cordless drill and wire brush this out and check this. Now, like I said, this truck's not going to be a show truck, so I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to use some rust stop, and it'll be good enough. This repair will outlast the truck. But that is definitely something to look for when you're buying a roof, is make sure that it's not all rusted in this channel. All right, so the tools you're going to need to do this is actually quite extensive. You're going to need a DA, something with some 80 grit on it. Well, the chickens are up. You're going to need some pliers, drill bits, tape measure, a couple different size screwdrivers, pencils, hammers, snips, wire brush on a drill, cutoff wheel, a decent sized hammer, utility knife. You're going to need some angle because you're going to have to make that bend into the roof that's in there. You're going to need a Dremel. You're going to need some copper pipe. If you're not good with welding, I'm going to make a couple mistakes and show you what this copper pipe's for. You're going to need some pretty strong magnets. You're going to need tape. You're going to need some grinders, a good wire brush. They're going to floppy disk, and probably some rust stop and maybe some paint. Also, you're going to need some C-clamps, and some wood to help in getting that metal bent into shape the way that you're going to need it. Yeah. All right, so when assessing how much of this you need to cut out, you got really two options. Option A is you take a camera like this and you run it down through here and kind of look at where the rust is and how bad the rust is. I don't know if it's really showing up on camera, but it's showing, yeah, right there is where it stops. So if you kind of, put this on here, it's somewhere right in here is where it's showing that the rust is going to stop. Now the other thing with this S-bend right in here, this starts to dull down and curve right in there. So we want to try to stay away from this as much as possible. We want to be on this side of that curve. So this is definitely one option. And like I said, it shows us that the rust is down to about here. The other option is just cut it a little bit, see where you're at. If you need to cut more, then take a little bit more. Just kind of keep growing as you go. And then, like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to map this out with a piece of tape so that way, when we transfer it onto our other roof, we know exactly how big of a section to cut out. And I'm going to cut it just a whisker bigger than what the tape is telling me, just because I want to make sure that I cover all my gaps and cover everything. So I'm going to trim this down probably 2 or 3 times before it's actually going to be right to fit this. All right, so we're back. I've sanded this down with 80 grit. Clean this up as best what I can. You can see some of the divots and whatnot in here that you really couldn't see before. But anyway, what's important is when you make this first cut, you want to have your grinder. You want to have your grinder on an angle like this. You don't want to hit your drip edge in there. And in fact, I'm going to take a piece of tape and cover that drip edge, just in case if the grinder does kick back on me a little bit, I don't have to worry about it hitting this drip edge. So I'm just going to take a piece of tape, stick it in here like so. Something along those lines, just to help protect this, because I don't want to ruin that edge. So I'm going to go ahead, just do a little bit of a video just showing how to get into that groove and get that cut out. And then we'll cut out, and I'll cut the rest of it out. But just show you, for starters, how to get started cutting that out. Now, another very important thing that I just thought of that this truck has that most trucks don't, but when I started cutting at it, it started smoking, and it reminded me of something. If you have insulation like that up in your roof, take it out of there. That is highly combustible and will catch on fire while you're grinding. Generally, you only see this in trucks with air conditioning or corporate trucks, the corporate Broncos that Ford used to give to their engineers and their corporate people. They would have a ton of this stuff in there. But like I said, that stuff is highly combustible. So you want to make sure you get all that out of there before you start grinding. I had forgotten about that. Go ahead and finish grinding this out now. So if you look, you just want to cut through that first layer. I don't know how well the camera is going to pick that. Oh, there we go. That's kind of picking up. I've just cut through this first layer right here, all the way down through here. Like I said, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to do this off camera. Cut this out, cut over here. Now to get down in here, you're going to need a Dremel with a little cutoff wheel. I'll probably come back when we get to that point, just so you can see how to make that final little cut down into this groove down here. All right, so I've got this basically cut out, but the problem you're going to run into is getting down in here without hitting this gutter. So I've got a little Dremel with a teensy tiny little cutoff wheel that I'm going to use. Now what you want is actually you want this blade to get it worn down about halfway, because once it's halfway it'll fit right in there. And go over this side. The blade is still too big. Putting it on here just to make it a little bit small on it. Now there still may be a tiny bit in there that I'm going to have to probably use a screwdriver. I've got a little grinder head with a tip onto it that I'll get in there and clean that all out with. That's not really a straight line there, so I'm going to have to clean that up and straighten that out a little bit. But let me get this piece out and then we'll be back. All right, so we got this out of here. As you can see, there is a lot of rust down in here. Down in here as well, there's a lot in there. I don't know how well the camera holds. You can see it down in here pretty good with the light. So I'm going to take the vacuum cleaner and vacuum this all out. You can see why I cut it up so high here, because the rust was right up to this point here. Like I said, so this entire piece of metal was shot. Now, if you look down here, you can see there's still some rust here. So I'm going to have to investigate inside of here. I may have to cut this back a little bit more if this is too rusty in here. And the same thing up here. This isn't too bad. You can see it's starting to taper down a little bit up here. But I'm going to take a look up here and see if the how bad the rust is here. And then we're going to go over and cut out a chunk out of the other cab. All right, so I've cleaned this all up, wire brushed it, got in there best I could with a wire brush. Now I'm going to use a wand with this rust stop. I sprayed this down with the rust stop. I'm going to feed this down through here, right down to the corner down there. And I'm just going to shoot some of this rust stop in here just to help prevent any future rust from happening. Just like that. Now I'm going to do the same down this way, and this would just help prevent Same in here. In this trough in here. And what this does is, if you look at the tip of that, it sprays it out to the side. It mists it out to the side. So it gets a good coat all inside there. So I'm gonna let that dry. While that's drying, we're gonna get the piece cut out of the other cab, and then we'll be back. All right, so same as when we cut this out of the other cab, it's important to get in here. Now what you want to do is you want a little extra material in here. So you don't want to cut on an angle. You kind of want to cut almost vertically straight down. So you're splitting this in half. You can always shave off, you can always grind off, I should say, a little bit more. It's real difficult to add more. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. Now the other thing is, mark this out. And as you can see, this has this pronounced bend right here. This is nice and rounded there. I'm going to cut extra. So I'm going to cut this out like this. So that way when I make this bend, I'm going to have to flatten this piece out. Then I'm going to clamp it between two pieces of angle iron and make this bend so that we have that same bend. But you can see right down in here, this S trough right in there, that's almost a perfect match right there. So like I said, you can use pieces of these cab. It does require a little bit of work, but at least you don't have to have a brake and a benders in order to make this. You can do it just from chunks from an existing cab.
Okay.
All right, so now we've got the piece cut out. As I kind of figured, and that's why I say it's important to make sure that the roof you're cutting from is in decent shape. This one has already started to rust, so I'm really gonna have to grind this. I'm gonna wire brush it, hit it with 80 grit, and then put rust treatment onto it, and then primer it, just to keep this from rusting, rusting through again. But if you can see both of these line up, but there's a pretty significant difference there. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna put these between two pieces of wood. You wanna make sure that this groove, you don't wanna crush this groove down at all. You want to make sure that that stays safe. And we're just going to put it between two pieces of wood and just take a big hammer. Now we kind of have a curve going here, which actually we need anyway, but I'm going to flip this over and do the same thing again to try to get some of that out of there. Now, I don't know if it shows, it still has a slight curve. It's not terribly bad, but, now what you'll see is that this matches up to that pretty well, because there is a slight curve to this. Now there's just a slight curve to that. So now we need to just go through and get this bent. So I'm going to get this set up in the clamps, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I bend it. Oh. All right, so I've got it clamped in here, and like I said, I just have a couple C clamps, just a couple piece of angle in this, because I put the angle down because it's got a nice sharp edge. This has kind of a rounded edge to it, and I want the line to be more defined. Off camera, Sarah asked the question. She was like, "You've got an expensive bender, why don't you use that instead?" And I'm doing all this way to show you how you can do it at home without expensive tools. If this was a truck I cared about, I would be using the bender. But being that this is just a work truck, just a basic truck, I'm just doing simple repairs to it just to get rid of the rust. That's why I'm doing it this way. So once you have it clamped in here, you've got your sharp piece of metal down. You want to put a piece of wood underneath of it to reinforce it. And like I said, we don't have to do much of a bend. So I'm just going to take this and just, get this set up better. Actually, Nothing ever goes right when you want it to. Yeah, we're still cleaned up there. I'm just setting it down on the concrete. There, now, where do we put our old piece of metal? Well, you can look down it now and see that we've got a nice crease going down through there, right where we need it. So I'm gonna go ahead, get this cut to fit, and then we'll be back for welding it in. All right, we're back. So I have this fitted in. It's not quite perfect, but it's almost there. If you can see, I've got a pretty good sized gap going on right here, and that's where the copper pipe comes in. You can fish the copper pipe through and cover the inside of this up. What the copper does is it absorbs a lot of heat, and also it gives you a stop to help fill this in. You know, if you start filling this in and you start burning a bigger hole, you definitely want to put a piece of copper in behind there. Now, another important thing you want to have is a razor knife. If you can see, this edge just doesn't quite line up here. So by putting the tip of a razor blade in here, like so, I can raise this up or lower it down. Thin screwdriver will also work. Now, another very, very, very important thing is if you're doing this, make sure that you do one side at a time. Don't do both sides. I had one time that I cut both sides out onto and put one side in, and after, you know, probably, and also I overheated it while I was welding, and after probably about 5 minutes of it cooling, the panel got a major sink into it like this, all the way across the roof, straight across. It buckled on me. So like I said, it's very important to take welding very slowly and, you know, do one side at a time. Don't do both, because once you get rid of this structure, you know, this is a reinforcement right here. You heat this down into this gutter, you've got all this heat, and what happens is it buckles down this way. It sounds weird, but trust me, it does work. I'm gonna go ahead and get this welded in. When I get to a spot where I need a piece of copper, I'm gonna show you how to do that, and then we'll wrap this up. I don't know how well this will come through here, but as you can see, I've got a pretty big gap going down through here. So because it's slightly misaligned, I'm gonna take a screwdriver and put it in here like this and bring it up a little bit. Now right behind here in this corner, right in there, that's a piece of copper that I've slid in from the inside of the truck. You can see it hanging up in there. What that'll do is that'll give me a place to weld to, so that not all the heat goes into the metal. The copper will absorb it. One, it cuts back on the warpage, and two, it helps fill in the gap. Let me get it done, and I'll show you how it looks. Now we're back. As you can see, that fills that gap in nicely. I don't know if it really shows, you know, a little bit more of a gap than what you want to have when you're welding. So I'm going to use that piece of copper, slide it all the way down through here, and fill this gap in using that piece of copper as a backer. Now, when you're using copper, you want to weld onto the copper and then go back and forth to the metal. So that way the copper absorbs the heat, and you're just, you know, going back and forth to the metal. So we're gonna get that done, and then we'll be back. Other than that, it's starting to look pretty good. It's a little low, as you can see. It's a little low right in here, so we're gonna have to put a screwdriver in here and bring that up. All right, one other neat little trick I wanted to point out. These magnets I got from Harbor Freight with these hooks. If you have a problem getting, especially if you're doing this by yourself and, you're trying to hold a piece of copper or trying to hold a welder, trying to hold everything, these magnets will hook into a thin bladed screwdriver well and hold it in place while you get it tacked in. Just another neat little trick I wanted to point out. All right, YouTubers, we're back. And as you can see, there is a slight dip going down right here. The rest of it is actually looking pretty good. But there is that dip going down through there. So like I said, I'm probably going to hammer and dolly that out. This truck's nothing special, but it's looking a lot better and it's getting there. And other than some, grinding wheels, some welding wire and gas, hasn't really cost me anything to fix it. A little bit of stop rust spray. But anyway, stay on your projects, keep them going. And if there's something you want to see more in detail, I have the other side that I still need to do. So I can, leave it in the comments and I can specifically focus on that so you can see exactly how it's all done.